The winter sun was fading when Elias Boone rode into a dying Arizona town. The street was empty except for the wind rolling dry leaves across the dirt road. His horse, an old gray mare named Dusty, moved slow, tired from long travel. Elias had been on the trail for weeks, searching for land he could call his own. He had no family, no wife waiting, and nothing but a few coins in his pocket. Life had taken almost everything from him except his will to survive. Outside the saloon sat an old trapper with a crooked hat, staring into a tin cup of whiskey. When Elias asked if there was a place for sale, the man gave a slow smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Cabin out yonder," the trapper said, pointing toward the red canyon. "Ain't worth much, but it's yours for 20 cents. Elias blinked. 20 cents? For a cabin? The old man nodded, his eyes shifting to the ground. "Belonged to someone long gone. Been empty near 10 years now. You want it, it's yours. But some say it's cursed." Elias wasn't a man who feared stories. He had seen the worst kind of ghosts, those who wore uniforms and carried rifles. So he pulled a small coin from his vest, placed it on the man's palm and said, "Cursed or not, it's home." He rode out of town before sunset, following the dry riverbed until the land turned wild and quiet. The cabin appeared as a dark outline against the evening sky, small, leaning to one side, the roof missing a few boards. Still, to Elias, it looked like peace. The ranch life had always been his dream, and this broken cabin was the first step. As he dismounted, Dusty snorted and stamped her hoof, uneasy. The air felt heavy still. Elias opened the old wooden door and dust swirled through the pale light. The inside smelled of dry wood and thyme. A broken chair lay on its side and a single bed frame leaned against the wall. There were strange markings carved into one of the posts, but he couldn't read them in the dim light. He set down his saddlebag, built a small fire in the cracked stone hearth, and boiled water for coffee. The firelight flickered over the cabin walls, revealing faded stains, long scratches, and a few feathers tied with old thread near the ceiling beams. Outside, the coyotes began their nighttime song. Elias sat with his back against the wall, sipping bitter coffee, and watched the shadows dance. Every creak made him turn his head. The wind whispered through the cracks in the boards like voices speaking too soft to understand. He told himself it was only the wind. The night grew colder. The fire dimmed. Dusty shifted restlessly outside, her hooves thudding against the frozen dirt. Elias stood, checked the latch on the door, and lay down on his blanket near the fire. He was almost asleep when he heard it. A slow creaking sound from above. It came from the attic. At first, he thought it was the wind again, but then it came again, steady, like something hanging and moving with each gust. He sat up, listening hard. His heart began to beat faster. He reached for his revolver, not out of fear of ghosts, but out of habit. He whispered to himself, "Old wood. That's all it is." The sound stopped. He lay back down, though his eyes stayed open. For hours he listened to the silence between the wind and the ticking of the fire. The cold pressed in through the floorboards, and the smell of dust filled his lungs. Sleep came slow and uneasy. At dawn, light crept through the cracks in the wall, pale and silver. Elias rose stiffly and fed the fire with dry sticks. Dusty was calm now, grazing quietly outside. He made a pot of coffee and stepped to the window to look at the land. The desert stretched endless. Red hills, dry sage, and a thin trail leading nowhere. He should have felt peace, but something gnawed at him. The memory of the noise above wouldn't leave his mind. He grabbed a lantern and his rope, then climbed the small ladder leading to the attic. The boards creaked under his boots. When the lantern light touched the rafters, he froze. A shape hung there, still heavy and unmistakable. It was a body, long and slender, the rope looped over a beam. Her dark hair fell like a curtain, brushing the floor. The sight made his throat tighten and his chest go cold. For a long time, Elias didn't move. The lantern shook in his hand. He had seen death before, on battlefields, in towns burned by greed, but this was different. This felt wrong. He swallowed hard and climbed the rest of the way up. The rope looked old, almost ready to break. Carefully, he drew his knife and cut it loose. The body fell softly into his arms, lighter than he expected. Cold but not yet dust. He laid her down on the boards and pulled the hair away from her face. She was young, maybe 20. Her skin was pale like moonlight, though her features were clearly Apache. Tall, strong-built, yet gentle in the way her hands rested. Around her neck was a mark, not deep but healed, as though she had once survived a hanging before this one. Elias's breath came uneven. On the wall beside her, carved deep into the wood, were the words, "Forgive me." And beside it, a name, Taya. He knelt there for a long time, staring. The air around him was still. Even the wind seemed to stop at the door. He didn't know who she was or what she had done, but he felt something inside him shift, like a gate opening to sorrow that wasn't his but felt familiar. When he finally carried her outside, the morning sun warmed the ground. He wrapped her gently in a blanket and laid her under the cedar near the hill. He didn't bury her yet. Something told him her story wasn't finished. He sat beside her through the afternoon, thinking about the trapper's words. Cursed, he had said, but curses didn't hang themselves. People did when pain became too heavy to carry. That night he sat by the fire again. The cabin felt different now, like someone else was there. The air no longer felt cold, it was sad, almost waiting. The noose lay on the floor beside his boots. He stared at it, wondering how long she had hung there, how long she had been alone. He said softly, "You're free now, whoever you are." The flames cracked. Outside, the wind moved through the cedar branches, and for a moment it sounded like a sigh. Elias didn't sleep at all. He kept the lantern burning, his eyes on the shadows that moved across the floor. When the dawn came again, he was still sitting in the same place, holding his hat in his hands, feeling like the land itself had whispered a secret that only he could hear. And as the sun rose over the canyon, he made a silent promise to the girl named Taya. He would find out who she was, why she had died here, and why her spirit had stayed behind. The cabin he bought for 20 cents was no longer just a home. It had become a grave, a mystery, and a promise carved into wood and wind. Elias Boone could not stop thinking about the girl named Taya. All day her name echoed in his mind, carved into the wall like a cry that time refused to erase. When he stepped outside that morning, the desert stretched quiet around him, the kind of silence that pressed into a man's heart. The cedar tree where he had laid her looked peaceful, but he knew she was waiting for something, maybe for someone to remember her story. He walked to the cabin again, holding his hat low against the cold wind. Inside, the smell of smoke and dust mixed with the faint scent of dry sage. His eyes went to the beam above where the rope had once hung. The place looked different now, emptier, yet alive with something he couldn't explain. He brushed his hand over the carved words, "Forgive me." The letters were deep, desperate, as though carved with shaking hands. He wondered what had driven her to that moment. Was she alone? Was she hiding from someone? Did anyone care that she was gone? Elias had lived his life with few questions, but now one death filled his world with them. Later that day, he saddled Dusty and rode to the nearest mining camp. The people there were rough, sunburned men with the kind of eyes that had seen too much. He asked around quietly, careful not to sound like a fool chasing a ghost. "You ever heard the name Tiana Quint?" he asked a blacksmith near the forge. The man frowned. "Sounds Apache, why?" Elias told him about the cabin, about finding her there. The blacksmith crossed himself. There was talk years back. A girl by that name tried to stop a fight between settlers and her people. Some soldiers blamed her when things went wrong, said she helped the raiders. "Don't know if it's true. Folks around here don't forgive easy." A storekeeper nearby joined in. "I heard different," she said. She tried to bring peace. Brought food to the soldiers' camp, tried to talk sense into them. But one night someone accused her of spying, and they chased her into the hills. Never saw her again. Elias listened to every word. His chest tightened as the pieces fit together. Taya had been a peacemaker, a girl trying to end bloodshed, and for that she was hunted. Maybe she ran to that cabin, hiding until hope ran out. He rode back home as the sun dropped behind the canyon. The light turned the rocks golden, and the sky burned red before fading into blue shadow. The world looked beautiful and cruel at the same time. When he reached the cabin, he dismounted slowly. The air felt strange again, heavy, expectant. That night, he sat near the fire thinking about the girl's last days. Outside, the wind picked up, sliding through the cracks like a whisper. Dusty pawed the ground uneasily. Elias lifted his head, listening. The wind wasn't steady. It came in soft waves like breathing. Then for a second he thought he saw movement by the fireplace. The flames flickered higher, and a shape took form. Tall, slender, like the outline of a woman made of light and shadow. Elias didn't move. The figure stood near the cedar logs stacked by the hearth, her long hair falling down her back. Her eyes glimmered faintly, full of sadness. His heart pounded, but his fear slowly gave way to calm. "You didn't mean to die, did you?" he said softly. The shape wavered, and he thought he heard a voice, barely a whisper. "Free." Then the light faded, and the cabin was empty again. Elias sat frozen for a long time. He had never believed in ghosts, but now he couldn't deny what he had seen. The next morning, he packed food and rode east to a small trading post near the river. There he met a missionary who had lived among the Apache years before. When Elias mentioned Taya, the old man nodded sadly. "She was the chief's daughter," the missionary said. "Brave heart, strong spirit. She came here once to plead for her people's safety. The soldiers didn't listen. They said she lied. She tried to save both sides, and both turned on her. Her father never stopped searching. Where is he now?" Elias asked. "Old, still with his people near the Black Ridge. Some say he prays to the wind each night for his lost child." Elias thanked him and rode back through the desert, his mind heavy with what he had learned. When he reached the cabin, the sky was dark again and a storm was building far off in the mountains. He went inside, lit the lamp, and stared at the place where she had once hung. "I know who you are now," he said quietly. "Your father still prays for you." The lamp flame shuddered as a gust of wind blew through a crack. For an instant, he smelled the faint scent of sage and cedar smoke, though none was burning. The light dimmed, then steadied again. That night she came back. Not as a shadow this time, but as a reflection in the window glass. Elias sat still, watching. Her eyes were calm now, almost grateful. He whispered, "I'll take you home." The air warmed, and for the first time he felt peace inside that cabin. The next day, Elias prepared for the journey. He wrapped the blanket around her body again, careful and respectful, as though she were only sleeping. He tied the bundle behind his saddle and set off toward the rising sun. The trail was rough and lonely. Each night he camped by dry riverbeds or under desert trees, listening to the coyotes sing. Sometimes, when the fire burned low, he thought he heard soft footsteps near his tent or felt a gentle hand brush his shoulder. It didn't frighten him. It felt like she was guiding him. After 3 days, he reached the Black Ridge Valley, where the land rose into sharp red cliffs. There he found the Apache camp, small, quiet, and watchful. When he rode in, the people stared at him, their faces wary. He dismounted slowly, removed his hat, and said, "I come with peace. I found your daughter." An old man stepped forward, his eyes clouded with age but still sharp with pain. Elias knew at once who he was. "Taya," the rancher said softly. "She was in a cabin west of the canyon." The chief trembled, his breath catching. He walked to the horse, his hand reaching for the blanket. When he saw her face, he made no sound, only sank to his knees and wept. The people gathered silently, some touching the earth in respect. Elias stood there, hat in hand, feeling the weight of the desert around him. The chief spoke after a long time. "You brought her home. You are not one of us, but you carry honor." Elias helped them dig her grave beneath a tall cedar tree overlooking the valley. The old chief placed a carved pendant over her chest and whispered a prayer in his language. As they finished, the wind blew through the branches, soft and warm like a blessing. The chief turned to Elias and placed a turquoise stone in his hand. "This belongs to you now," he said. "The desert knows what you did." When Elias rode back that evening, the sky was filled with color, orange, pink, and violet, as if the heavens themselves had opened for her spirit. He looked once more toward the valley. For a brief moment he thought he saw her standing near the cedar, smiling. Then the wind took her form and carried it away. He returned to the cabin before nightfall. The place was silent again, but no longer lonely. The noose was gone, the air clear, the shadows warm. He sat by the fire and whispered, "You're home now." As the flames flickered, a gentle breeze passed through the open door, rustling the wildflowers he had gathered. It was like the cabin itself exhaled after years of holding its breath. Elias leaned back against the wall, closed his eyes, and let peace finally settle over him and the land that had carried her sorrow. When Elias Boone returned to the cabin, the land seemed quieter than before. The wind no longer cried through the cracks, and the strange cold feeling that used to linger inside had faded away. He unpacked his saddle, brushed Dusty down, and stood outside for a long while, looking toward the canyon. Somewhere beyond those red rocks, Taya now rested under the cedar tree beside her people. He had kept his promise. That night, as he sat by the fire, Elias thought he would finally sleep peacefully. But sleep did not come. The silence around him felt heavy again, not frightening but expectant, like something unfinished still waited to be heard. He stared at the flames until his eyes grew sore, wondering what story this land was still trying to tell. In the days that followed, Elias worked to rebuild the cabin. He fixed the roof, mended the walls, and replaced the broken window frames. He even carved a new door, strong and clean so that no ghost or storm could enter without invitation. It gave him purpose. Yet every evening as the sun dipped low, he found himself looking toward the hill where he had first laid Taya down. One afternoon, as he dug a small garden behind the cabin, his shovel struck something hard. He knelt down, brushed away the dirt, and found an old tin box sealed with rust. Carefully, he pried it open. Inside were a few trinkets, a beaded bracelet, a folded paper with drawings, and a silver brooch shaped like a bird. The paper was worn but still readable. It contained words written in both English and Apache. He carried it inside, laid it on the table, and studied it by lamplight. The writing told a story, Taya's story. She had come to that cabin with a small group of people after the massacre near the river. They had been running from soldiers, hiding, starving. When winter came, her people left to find help, but she stayed behind, too weak to travel. The last line on the paper said, "If anyone finds me, tell my father I tried to keep peace. Tell him I never gave up." Elias folded the paper with shaking hands. The truth struck him like thunder. She hadn't hanged herself out of despair. She had been trying to leave a message for someone who might come later. Maybe the rope had slipped. Maybe the storm that night had brought her to her end. But she had died believing she could still make peace. He set the paper near the fire and sat quietly. The girl he had thought cursed was not a ghost of guilt. She was a messenger, a symbol of what people had lost in their hate. Elias realized that her spirit had stayed not for revenge but for remembrance. She needed someone to tell her story right. From that day, Elias began writing. Every night after working on his land, he took a piece of charcoal and wrote on whatever paper he could find. He wrote about the war, about the townsfolk's fear, about Taya's bravery. His words were rough and simple but honest. He wanted her name to be remembered not as a myth, but as truth. Weeks passed, and the cabin slowly became more than just a home. It became a place of memory. Travelers passing through sometimes stopped for water or rest. Elias would give them bread, coffee, and a story. He never spoke of ghosts or curses. Instead, he spoke of a brave Apache woman who had tried to end violence between her people and the settlers. Some men listened politely. Others scoffed, not wanting to believe. But a few, especially the younger ones, listened closely, their eyes thoughtful. One evening, a young soldier stopped by. He said his name was Daniel Harris, and that he had once served in the same unit that had hunted Taya's people years ago. When Elias mentioned her name, the soldier lowered his head. "I was there," he said quietly. "They told us she was dangerous. We didn't know the truth." Elias poured him coffee and listened as the young man spoke about how war had turned men into monsters, how they'd followed orders they didn't understand. "If I'd known she was trying to help, maybe things could have been different," Daniel said. Elias handed him the beaded bracelet he had found in the box. "Then help her now," he said. "Tell others what really happened." The soldier nodded, tears shining in his eyes. He promised he would. That night, Elias watched him ride off into the darkness, feeling that a small piece of peace had finally begun to spread beyond the canyon. That winter was long and cold, but the cabin stayed warm. Sometimes, when Elias woke in the middle of the night, he thought he saw a faint glow near the fireplace, a soft shimmer like moonlight touching the floor. It didn't frighten him anymore. It made him smile. He would whisper, "You're welcome, Taya," and go back to sleep. As spring came, the land bloomed again. Wildflowers covered the hills, and the cedar tree by the canyon grew taller and greener than before. Elias often rode there, bringing fresh flowers to her grave. He talked to her out loud, not as to a ghost, but as to a friend. "You were brave," he'd say. "You did what most men wouldn't." One afternoon, while tending his cattle, Elias saw something that made him pause. Two riders approached from the distance, a man and a young woman, both Apache. When they reached him, the older man introduced himself as Chief Naquint, Taya's brother. He had heard from the soldier Daniel about what Elias had done. "You gave our sister peace," the chief said. "Now we come to thank you." Elias didn't know what to say. The woman dismounted and handed him a small pouch. Inside was a piece of the same turquoise stone her father had given him, polished smooth and bright. "For your courage," she said softly. They spent the afternoon together, sitting near the cabin, sharing food and stories. The chief told Elias how his people had begun to make peace with nearby settlers, trading goods instead of fighting. "It's what she always wanted," he said. "Her dream lives because you listened." That night after they left, Elias felt something inside him settle for good. He went out to the cedar tree once more, where the wind carried the scent of blossoms and sage. "You did it, Taya," he whispered. "You found your peace, and you gave some to the rest of us, too." As he turned to leave, he thought he heard a faint voice in the wind, soft, like laughter carried across time. He smiled, knowing she was free at last. The years passed gently. Elias grew older, his hair turning gray, his hands rough with work. The cabin stayed the same, sturdy and calm. Travelers continued to visit, and he always told them the same story about the brave girl in the desert that remembered her name. Over time, they began calling it the Cabin of Peace. One evening, as the sun sank low and the sky turned gold, Elias sat outside with his hat on his knee. The world felt quiet, complete. He looked toward the cedar tree one last time and whispered, "Rest easy now." A soft breeze brushed against his face, warm and kind, like a farewell touch. He closed his eyes, smiling. And somewhere beyond the canyon, where the wind met the stars, it was said that two figures could sometimes be seen walking side by side, a rancher and a tall Apache girl, both free, both home at last. The days rolled into years, and the Arizona desert changed little, but the man who lived in that lonely cabin did. Elias Boone had found peace in the company of silence. The land no longer felt empty. It felt alive, like an old friend breathing beside him. Every morning he rose before sunrise, brewed coffee over the small fire, and stood outside his cabin watching the light climb over the red cliffs. The world looked clean and endless, and he thanked the land for one more day. Taya's grave under the cedar tree had become sacred ground to him. He kept it neat, bringing fresh wildflowers each week. Sometimes he placed smooth stones on top as a mark of respect, the way her people did. He never forgot her. She was part of the land now, part of the story the wind told. Over time, travelers began hearing whispers about the cabin. They came from distant towns, cowhands, drifters, even families moving west, each drawn by tales of a quiet rancher who offered water, food, and shelter to anyone in need. Elias never turned anyone away. His cabin, once cursed, had become a place of kindness. One hot afternoon, a group of miners stopped by. They had lost their way while looking for a new claim. Dusty and sunburned, they asked for water, and Elias gave it freely. As they rested, one of them looked at the carvings on the wall inside the cabin. "Who wrote this name here?" he asked, pointing to where it said Taya. Elias smiled faintly. "A friend," he said. They noticed a collection of papers stacked neatly on the table. Elias's writings. He had rewritten Taya's story many times, trying to make sure every word was true. The miners asked to hear it, and he read a few lines aloud. His voice was soft, steady, carrying the weight of both sorrow and hope. When he finished, no one spoke for a while. Then one man said quietly, "She sounds like someone worth remembering." Elias nodded. She was. When they rode away that evening, one of them promised to tell her story wherever he went. Elias watched them disappear into the orange dust and felt a small sense of comfort. The truth was spreading just like he hoped. That night, lightning flashed far off in the distance. Elias sat by the fire, remembering the night he first found her. The wind blew gently through the cracks, but now it carried no fear. It carried memories warm and alive. He thought of all the people who had come and gone, the faces that listened, the hearts that softened when they heard about the Apache girl who tried to bring peace. The next morning, Elias decided to ride to town for supplies. He hadn't been there in months. As he entered the small settlement, folks greeted him kindly. Some still called him the ghost rancher, half jokingly but with respect. He sold some hides, bought grain, and stopped by the small general store. Inside, he found a surprise. A hand-drawn flyer pinned to the wall read, "The Tale of Taya Quint, the Peacemaker of the Desert." Below it were words describing her courage and her message of unity between settlers and the Apache. Elias read it twice, his eyes stinging with emotion. Someone had written her story, spreading it farther than he ever could. The shopkeeper noticed him staring. "Oh, you've heard of her too," the man said. "Some soldier told the story months back. Said an old rancher kept her memory alive. Folks have been sharing it across camps and towns. Sounds like she was something special." Elias only smiled and tipped his hat. He didn't tell the man it was him. He didn't need to. Her story had finally found wings. On his ride home, the air smelled of rain. The desert sky turned gray and thunder rolled softly. When he reached his cabin, he tied Dusty to the post and watched the clouds sweep over the cliffs. The rain began to fall, slow, steady, washing the land clean. For years, that land had known only dust and drought. Now, for the first time in a long time, it felt alive again. Elias stood in the rain, his hat dripping, and whispered, "You did it, Taya. The land forgives now." He spent the evening sitting by the window, watching the rain soak into the thirsty ground. The smell of wet earth filled the cabin. The cedar tree swayed gently under the storm, its branches shining silver under flashes of lightning. Elias thought he could almost see her there, her tall shape standing proud and calm beneath the rain. Weeks later, word spread that peace talks had begun between the settlers and the Apache in nearby territories. A local preacher and the same young soldier, Daniel Harris, were helping lead the effort. When Daniel visited Elias again, his face was full of purpose. "It's working," he said. "We told her story and people listened. They said if she could try to make peace back then, maybe it's time we try again now." Elias shook his hand firmly. "You're doing her proud." "She's the reason I came back," Daniel said. "You showed me what truth can do." When the soldier left, Elias watched him go with pride. He had never thought a single act, cutting down a rope, giving a girl her name back, could change so much. But now even the land itself seemed to hum with new life. The grass grew greener. The nights were gentler. It was as if her spirit had poured herself into every inch of soil. One quiet morning, a small group of Apache children came to visit with their teacher. They had heard the story of Taya and wanted to see where she once rested. Elias led them to the cedar tree, explaining what had happened long ago. The children placed flowers and sang softly in their language. Their voices rose and fell like the wind, and Elias stood still, his eyes wet with tears he didn't try to hide. When the children left, he stayed behind, kneeling beside the grave. "You're not forgotten," he whispered. "Not anymore." He felt a soft gust of wind brush his shoulder. It was warm and calm. He smiled, knowing what it meant. That evening, he sat on his porch watching the sun set behind the red canyon. The desert glowed like a sea of fire before turning purple and blue. His hands were rough and wrinkled now, but his heart felt young again. For the first time in his long life, he didn't feel alone. He thought about the cabin when he first bought it. Broken, silent, cursed. He remembered the night he heard that first creak from the rafters, the terror that filled his chest and the sorrow that followed, and now, years later, the same place had become a haven of peace. Sometimes he wondered if she still visited. Not as a ghost, but as the wind that stirred the flowers or the warmth that touched his face. He hoped she was watching, proud of what her memory had done. That night, as he sat by the dying fire, Elias took out the turquoise stone the chief had given him years ago. It glowed faintly in the firelight like captured starlight. He set it beside the paper he had written her story on and smiled. When he blew out the lamp, the cabin did not fall into darkness. The moonlight slipped through the cracks, soft and silver, filling the room. He whispered, "Good night, Taya," before closing his eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the cedar tree, gentle and kind. The desert was quiet, not empty, but full of peace. And in the silence, if anyone had listened close enough, they might have heard a woman's soft voice carried through the night air, whispering her thanks to the man who had given her story back to the world. Years passed quietly after that last rain, and the desert around the little cabin changed in small, gentle ways. The cedar tree grew tall and strong, its roots deep in the red earth. Wildflowers bloomed around it every spring, yellow, white, and purple, like the land was finally proud to show its colors again. The cabin, once half broken and feared, now stood straight and warm, its smoke rising softly every morning as Elias Boone started his day. He was no longer young, but age sat on him kindly. His beard had turned white, his hands were marked with lines of work, and his eyes had softened with peace. Every scar, every wrinkle told a story of a man who had lived through loss and found something sacred in return. He didn't need much anymore. His horse, his tools, a warm fire, and the company of the wind that spoke through the hills. Travelers still came from time to time. They had heard stories of the rancher who once found the Apache girl and gave her peace. Most came out of curiosity. Some came seeking hope. Elias welcomed them all, offering bread, water, and quiet company. He never asked for money. Kindness pays itself, he used to say, pouring coffee into chipped tin cups. Sometimes they would ask to see her grave, and he would lead them to the cedar tree. He always spoke about her in a calm voice, never as a ghost, but as a woman of courage. She tried to stop hate, he'd say. The world broke her for it, but she didn't fail. She still brings peace even now. Many of those travelers left the place changed. Some carried her story to distant towns. Others returned months later, saying that hearing about her had made them forgive old enemies or look at life with new eyes. Elias never took credit. It was her doing, he'd say with a small smile. As the years went on, more people began visiting the cabin, calling it the House of Peace. A preacher once asked Elias if he would turn it into a chapel, but he refused kindly. It already is one, he said. You don't need walls or sermons for faith, just truth and a bit of love. The preacher nodded, understanding. Word spread, and before long the place became something sacred to both settlers and Apache alike. Each spring, groups from both sides came together under the cedar tree, sharing food, songs, and prayers. There were no fences there, only open land and open hearts. One bright morning, Elias woke early as usual. The sky was pale and soft, and a cool breeze carried the smell of sage. He made coffee, fed Dusty, who was old and slow now, and sat outside watching the sunrise. The world looked golden, painted with peace. He thought of Taya again, as he always did. You'd like this, he murmured. You'd smile to see how they come together now. After breakfast, he walked to the cedar tree, carrying a small wooden box he had carved himself. Inside was the turquoise stone, the beaded bracelet, and the paper where Taya had written her final words. He placed the box at the base of the tree, whispering, Your story's safe here. I reckon I'll be joining you soon. That evening he sat by the fire, writing one last time. His hands were slow but steady. He wrote about the years after peace came, about how people learned to live side by side again. He wrote that kindness and forgiveness were stronger than guns, stronger than any wall or chain. He ended the letter with a few simple words. If you ever find this cabin, remember, peace begins when one person listens to another. He folded the letter and placed it beside the turquoise stone on the table. Then he blew out the lamp, sat back in his chair, and listened to the wind one more time. It was soft like a song. In it, he thought he heard her voice again, gentle, grateful, free. The next morning, the cabin's chimney was still, the fire cold. A passing rider found Elias sitting by the window, his hat resting on his knee, a faint smile on his face. He looked peaceful, as though he had fallen asleep listening to the desert. They buried him beneath the cedar tree beside Taya, under the wide sky that had watched over them both. For years after, travelers who passed through the valley said strange things about the place. They said the air felt calm there even during storms. They said horses never spooked near the tree and coyotes never howled too close. Some swore that on clear nights 2 figures could be seen walking side by side along the ridge, one tall and slender, the other broad and steady. The wind carried their laughter through the canyons like music. As time went on, the little cabin turned into a landmark. Generations of ranchers rebuilt it, keeping its shape the same. Some added a stone marker that read, Here rest Elias Boone and Taya Naquint, 2 souls who taught the desert peace. By the early 1900s, the place became a gathering spot for those who sought silence or reflection. Children would play near the tree, not with fear but with joy. Families told their kids that the land there was blessed because 2 people, one from each world, had found friendship strong enough to heal a wound between nations. Decades later, when the world changed again and machines roared across the plains, the cabin still stood. Windmills spun nearby, but the cedar tree remained untouched. Travelers still stopped there, taking off their hats and standing quietly for a moment. Some said they could feel something soft in the air, like a hand resting gently on their shoulder. In the end, the legend of the cabin spread far and wide. Writers, historians, and wanderers told the story of the rancher who bought a cabin for 20 cents and found not gold, not treasure, but a purpose, to bring peace to a restless land. Some said it was just a story, but those who visited knew better. The land itself seemed to breathe with truth. On certain evenings, when the sun turned the canyon walls crimson and the air smelled of rain, a whisper could still be heard, two voices blending into the wind. One was deep and calm, the other soft like the rustle of feathers. Together they said, "Forgive me," and live. People came to love that story not because it was strange, but because it was human. It reminded them that even the loneliest places could become holy, and even the smallest acts, like cutting a rope, saying a kind word, or listening to another's sorrow, could change the course of history. And so the cabin that once held tragedy became a light in the desert. Generations later, when a young woman riding west asked an old cowboy where she could find peace, he pointed to the horizon and said, "Ride till you find a cedar tree on a red hill. You'll know it when you see it." That's where peace was born. The woman rode on, and when she reached the cabin, she found it standing proud against the fading sun. She sat beneath the tree, closed her eyes, and felt the breeze touch her face. It carried no sadness, only calm. In that moment she smiled, understanding that what began with sorrow had ended with love, and that the land remembered everything. And so the story of Elias Boone and Tiana Quint lived on, carried by wind and time, told by every traveler who stopped to listen. The cabin still stood quiet and kind, guarding the secret that peace can grow even in the harshest soil, if just one heart dares to listen to another.